Hello.
Hello, how are you?
You look happy.
I am. I'm quite delighted. Hello.
What's your name?
My name is Daliso Chaponda.
There isn't a lot about the Series 11 finalist of Britain's Got Talent that isn't absolutely fascinating, and the fact that he was nearly 40 at the time is one of the least interesting things to know about Daliso Chaponda. The viral comedian left all the judges in stitches with his short set at his audition and even managed to receive a ticket straight to the semi-finals due to his sheer potential. Ever since this remarkable performance, Daliso has only continued to rise as a comedian, taking risks and building more of an audience for himself. Daliso's time on the show made him a fan favorite, and despite comedians having to fight tooth and nail to get a spot in the finals, Daliso seemed to manage it with ease every week. Of course, that makes one wonder, what's going on with the bold and charming comedian? So join us as we take a detailed look into what really happened to Daliso Chaponda from Britain's Got Talent.
Jokes, but I haven't done any this year because I don't know what's going on. I had to go back to Africa just to see what a stable government looks like.
The story begins with Daliso Chaponda being born in Zambia as the son of refugees from Malawi in 1979. Originally from humble beginnings, Daliso's father, George Chaponda, worked as a lawyer and later as a senior diplomat. Unsurprisingly, this meant that his father's work took him to many different places, forcing Daliso to become a global citizen early on in life. He's lived in countries like Kenya, Swaziland, Somalia, and Canada, but despite living in these places, Daliso never picked up the local language. Daliso went to a private school in Kenya, an experience he's spoken about in his gigs before studying at Concordia University in Canada. But Daliso's journey as a comedian was not something he planned as a kid. It was actually attending Canada's world-famous Mirthfest that made him realize that his time would be better spent on comedy and not computer programming or English, like his parents suggested. And so, after his love affair with comedy began in 2001, he got his start as most comedians do. It is small venues like open mic nights and performing at clubs that helped Daliso build his reputation as a comedian. In fact, it was in 2002 that Daliso headlined his first show, Feed This Black Man at Concordia University. This critically acclaimed show allowed him to establish himself as a comedian worth watching. Performing at Mirthfest became his big break and his career soared to new heights. He later moved to South Africa when his visa expired, but didn't find the comedy scene there to be as exciting as the ones he was used to back home. In an interview years later, he talked about how South Africa did end up producing great comedians eventually, but at the time he felt hopeless. This is why he moved to the UK in 2006 and started opening for other more established comedians like John Bishop. This is also when he started appearing in bigger venues all around the world and building an audience that wanted to see him perform on his own. A short 2 years later, Daliso was invited to perform at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe Best of the Fest. In 2009, Daliso performed for the first time in Malawi, and he opened for comedian Sugar Sammy in Dubai and Jordan. While there are many who find Daliso's charming and outspoken personality delightful, as evidenced by hundreds of thousands of views on his video, it isn't as though he's led a career free of controversy. A few years before Daliso appeared on Britain's Got Talent during one of his L'Africa shows in Malawi, Daliso made a joke about the Malawian flag, changing from a rising sun to a full sun. He commented on the country's internal decline, joking that the flag should have been changed to an eclipse in his set. And that's when all hell broke loose. The joke wasn't taken very well by the Malawian authorities, who threatened to arrest Daliso over it. He ended up having to talk to the censorship board to smooth things over, and fortunately Daliso didn't actually end up getting arrested. Daliso may not have been that well known in mainstream media when he first auditioned for Britain's Got Talent, but he was certainly making a name for himself as both an aspiring comedian and writer. His website describes him as a prolific fiction writer, claiming that he's penned and published multiple genres, including science fiction, mysteries, and fantasy. In fact, Daliso's been writing professionally since 2014, so for those who are familiar with his career's trajectory, it is no surprise when he started working with BBC in 2014 to co-write a drama comedy series inspired by the incident, Sibusiso Mamba's When the Laughter Stops. In the show, he plays one half of a married couple with Ava Vidal, and it explores their dynamic together in a fun plot guaranteed to leave audiences in stitches. He kept writing and performing until finally finding a place for himself in one of the country's biggest national talent competitions. When asked by Tola Ositelu about why he chose to audition for Britain's Got Talent, a novices platform, despite being a veteran of sorts, Daliso seemed to object to the show being called a beginner's platform in the first place. His argument was that people who do well on the show aren't always amateurs, and that, at the time, he couldn't understand why he couldn't get through despite performing objectively good sets. Apparently, he liked the idea of going to a show where more experienced people from the industry could tell him if he did something he shouldn't. He was not getting any attention from mainstream media, and part of why he went on the show was to get good exposure and build a bigger audience. As anyone who's watched season 11 of Britain's Got Talent will happily tell you, Daliso was more successful when it came to winning hearts and delivering performances that would be viewed millions of times. The video of Daliso's audition where he received the golden buzzer from Judge Amanda Holden has been viewed over 12 million times on YouTube alone, and his performances from the semi-finals, finals, and the grand finale all have accumulated well over 4 million views as well. And although Daliso did not end up winning the season, he did become a fan favorite and won many hearts. He seemed to have a plan on exactly what to do after his time on the show. He was invited to create a BBC radio series on BBC Radio 4 called Daliso Chaponda, Citizen of Nowhere. The gritty comedy act has been described as a diachronic political satire focusing on the relationship between the West and Africa, which touches on many sensitive subjects that are usually considered too serious to be incorporated in a comedy sketch. Daliso did face backlash for some of the things he joked about, but as we've learned, he finds it fairly easy to brush off negative critique, especially if he believes it to be unnecessary. It probably helped that he had started his first world tour titled What the Africans Said only a month before in February of 2018, and later in the same year Daliso appeared on an episode of The Apprentice after show, You're Fired. With his career on the rise and a catalogue of gigs lined up, Daliso Chaponda threaded gently into Britain's Got Talent waters again when he returned as a representative of Malawi and Great Britain on the international platform. The performance was extremely well liked, and even joked about coming in third in the 11th series of the show, his single life, and Brexit. After the act, Judge Amanda Holden, one of the biggest fans from his last time on the show, commented that she'd always had a soft spot for him. Judge David Walliams said that even the thought of Daliso puts a smile on his face and that comedy just flows from him. Unfortunately, despite all this, he was unable to make it to the finals. Daliso also performed at the Royal Variety Performance in 2020, where he performed alongside Jason Manford, the Prince of Wales, and Captain Tob. The show was even recorded and aired on ITV. Then, later in the year, in winter, Daliso performed with comedians Francine Lewis, Robert White, Lost Voice Guy, and Catherine and Joe O'Malley as part of a comedy skit by David Walliams titled Comedy Christmas Calendar, which occurred in Britain's Got Talent Christmas Spectacular. Daliso Chaponda has used his social media very cleverly to market himself and his gigs long before he was on BGT, and he seems to be continuing his operation on his socials to this date. If you're looking for upcoming shows and for some reason can't access his website, Daliso Chaponda's Instagram with nearly 29,000 Instagram followers is a great place to start. From personal posts to news about his current and upcoming projects, Daliso does not hold back when it comes to celebrating himself. Most recently, Daliso is set to perform in Johannesburg, London, and Zambia, and earlier this year he also appeared on an episode of BBC Two's QIXL, the game show hosted by Zandy Toksvig. There's also Daliso's long-standing writing career, and it seems as though he's currently working on a novel as well. Daliso's ability to write and perform on issues that many people in his field don't touch with a 10-foot pole, all while walking the fine line between appropriate and inappropriate jokes, is partly what makes him so refreshing to listen to. In an interview once, Daliso talked about his process and said that he copes with monsters by making fun of them, and the statement feels like the most accurate description of both his comedic style and the content he chooses to incorporate in his sketches.